If we look closely at the dusty streets of Enugu, we will find 19-year-old Adana Wachuku, a girl whose quiet grace masked a soul accustomed to silent suffering. Ever since her beloved father passed away, the compound they once shared had transformed into a hollow shell of brick and mortar. The physical structure of the homestead remained entirely unchanged. The sun still beat down on the same red dirt yard, and the walls stood firm. Yet the genuine warmth that once defined her life had vanished completely. Her father had cherished her above all else, his gentle face always a beacon of peace in a harsh world. But his untimely death stripped away her shield, leaving her at the mercy of her bitter stepmother, Mama Ruth Wachuku. Concealing her deep-seated animosity was never something Mama Ruth cared to do. She ruled the household with a sharp tongue and an iron fist, constantly finding reasons to vent her endless frustration on her stepdaughter. No matter how early Adana rose, or how meticulously she swept the red dust from the yard, her stepmother would always locate an imaginary speck of dirt to complain about. Even when the girl spent her entire day fetching heavy buckets of water, washing mounds of laundry, and cooking over a hot stove, she received only cold, empty glares. To make matters worse, Mama Ruth's own daughter, Anita, who was slightly older and fiercely prideful, took pleasure in watching Adana suffer, while she herself demanded constant adoration. Before the first light of dawn could pierce the dark horizon, Adana was already out in the cold yard, clutching her local broom. She swept the hard-packed earth, scrubbed the encrusted pots from the previous night, hauled heavy water basins from the well, and washed the family laundry until her fingers were raw. Yet her labor had only just begun, as Mama Ruth immediately ordered her to the small farm plot behind the compound. As the scorching African sun began to rise, the young girl worked the soil in her faded blouse and worn skirt, sweat pouring down her face and dripping onto her dusty rubber sandals. Though her beautiful cornrow-braided head was bowed in exhaustion and her stomach growled with hunger, she did not utter a single complaint. Hovering like a shadow by the doorway, Mama Ruth watched the exhausted girl return with utter disdain. She barked orders at Adana to accompany her stepsister Anita to the roadside shop, demanding she act as a servant and carry her heavy handbag. While they were out, a luxury vehicle pulled up, and a man of immense stature stepped out. It was Prince Amadi Anozi, a nobleman whose quiet confidence and elegant bearing commanded respect without him saying a single loud word. He greeted them warmly, but his eyes completely bypassed the dressed-up Anita, locking instead onto the simple, natural beauty of Adana. When he gently asked for her name, she replied softly, her heart fluttering under his focused, admiring gaze. The prince spoke her name like a precious melody, telling her how beautiful it sounded. While Adana offered a shy thank you, Anita quickly pushed forward to introduce herself, desperate to steal the nobleman's attention. But Prince Amadi remained focused on the quiet girl, asking about her life, while Anita seethed with unspoken rage. After he drove away, leaving behind a lingering look of deep interest, Anita's face contorted into a mask of pure jealousy. The walk home was filled with a suffocating silence, but the moment they crossed the threshold of their compound, Anita began to scream for her mother, falsely claiming that Adana had behaved like a loose woman with the high-born stranger. Desperately trying to defend her honor, Adana cried out that her stepsister was spinning a web of lies. But Anita only doubled down on her deceit, wildly fabricating a story that the prince had proposed marriage on the spot. Mama Ruth demanded the absolute truth, though her biased mind had already sided with her own daughter. Despite Adana's tears and pleas, Mama Ruth refused to believe her, claiming she had brought immense shame to the family name. The confrontation escalated until a harsh blow landed on Adana's cheek, leaving a stinging red mark. Even as the poor girl wept from the pain and injustice, her stepmother coldly declared that the bruise was proof of her guilt. Sobbing into her hands, Adana pleaded that it was all a terrible misunderstanding, but her words fell on deaf ears. When young Peter tried to speak up in her defense, Mama Ruth instantly silenced him, ordering him back inside the house. The cruel woman then piled more labor onto Adana, commanding her to wash the mountain of plates, cook the evening meal, and head straight back to the dusty farm. When Adana weakly pointed out that she had already worked the fields that morning, Mama Ruth sneered, telling her that the farm was exactly where a worthless girl like her belonged. The stepmother vowed to keep a strict watch on who approached their gate, determined to keep Adana isolated. While Adana was preparing to head back to the hot fields, her young brother Peter quietly slipped out to find her. He carefully handed her a small portion of food he had secretly wrapped and saved from his own meal. Though she felt guilty for taking it, her starving body desperately needed the nourishment, and she thanked him with a tearful, weary smile. She urged him to run back inside before their stepmother caught them together. Walking down the narrow footpath to the farm, Adana found a brief moment of peace under a sparse tree, slowly chewing the small offering. She savored every single bite, wishing she could make the tiny meal last forever. Although the boiled yam was completely dry and the piece of fish was microscopic, it tasted like pure heaven to her. As she ate, her eyes wandered across the barren farm, and her mind drifted back to the one person who had truly loved her, her late mother. Adana's memories of her were like scattered precious fragments of a beautiful dream. She remembered the soothing touch of her mother's hand, smoothing down her dresses, her melodic laughter in the cool evenings, and the comforting scent of palm oil and local soap. These beautiful recollections were slowly fading with the passing years, but they remained her only sanctuary in a world that had become incredibly hostile. She could not help but wonder if their family home would still be filled with warmth and laughter if her mother were still alive today. In that alternate reality, eating a simple meal would not feel like a rare, forbidden reward, and voicing her thoughts would not carry such a dangerous risk. Sighing deeply, she swallowed the very last morsel of yam, wiped her eyes, and stood up to face the brutal afternoon sun once again. The weeds were thick and deeply rooted, demanding every ounce of her remaining strength as her muscles screamed in protest. Sweat trickled down her neck and spine, yet she labored in absolute silence, carrying her heavy burden because she had no other choice. While Adana was sweating under the blistering heat, she had no idea that the wealthy stranger from the road was completely captivated by her memory. Prince Amadi reached the grand royal palace just as the golden evening light began to paint the sky. The armed palace guards saluted as his sleek car swept through the iron gates, passing manicured lawns and towering white pillars. Yet the prince barely saw the luxury surrounding him because his thoughts were entirely consumed by the image of a quiet girl with tired, beautiful eyes and simple cornrows. In the grand parlor, his mother, Queen Lydia, sat with her usual regal poise, a woman of immense influence who fiercely guarded her family lineage. The queen was a woman who valued social standing, impeccable manners, and royal bloodlines above all else. For years, she had quietly fretted that her only son would never choose a bride and settle down to secure the dynasty. So when Amadi stepped into the room and hinted that he was harboring a massive secret, the atmosphere instantly grew tense with anticipation. He confessed that he had finally met a woman who captured his heart entirely, describing her as nothing short of extraordinary. The palace sitting room erupted in a flurry of surprised whispers and rapid questions, as his mother and sisters demanded to know who this mystery woman was. Unable to believe he fell in love in a single day. The revelation came as a complete shock to his sister Vivian, who questioned how he could make such a life-altering decision in a few hours. But Amadi remained steadfast, declaring with absolute conviction that this girl was the only one he wished to marry. Hearing her son speak of marriage, Queen Lydia cautioned him to take the matter seriously, only for Amadi to reiterate his deep sincerity. While his other sister, Susan, viewed this sudden development as a beautiful blessing from the heavens, Vivian remained deeply skeptical of his quick judgment. Desperate to understand the gravity of his feelings, she finally demanded to know the name of the woman who had captivated him. With a soft, reverent smile, the prince whispered that her name was Adana. The family repeated the name, noting how beautiful and traditional it sounded on their tongues. When Vivian asked what grand gesture the girl had made to win his heart so rapidly, Amadi explained that she did nothing artificial. She was simply beautifully herself. He assured his mother that Adana possessed an innate dignity and came from a respected, decent lineage, even if he did not yet know every detail of her life. Intrigued by her son's passionate defense of this mysterious girl's grace, Queen Lydia declared that a royal meeting must be arranged immediately, a decision everyone eagerly supported. As we watch this royal family plan their future, we cannot help but notice a sudden chilling shift in the room's energy when Vivian insisted on meeting this remarkable girl. While Amadi happily agreed to arrange the introduction, a heavy shadow fell over his other sister, Susan, whose cheerful demeanor vanished. Queen Lydia, possessing a mother's sharp intuition, immediately noticed the sudden sadness and worry clouding Susan's eyes. Despite Susan's desperate attempts to brush off her anxiety as nothing, her family could see the sheer terror she was trying to hide. Vivian urged her to speak, sensing that Susan was keeping a troubling secret that none of them could afford to ignore. Though fear began to creep into the royal parlor, Vivian tried to remain strong as she urged her family to address the looming crisis. She revealed that Susan had been plagued by terrifying, vivid nightmares of a dark, malevolent presence hovering over their household. When the queen gently pressed her daughter to describe these visions, Susan hesitated, terrified of bringing bad luck into their home. Yet the gravity of her fear could not be hidden, especially since the wise elders and spiritual seers of the kingdom had failed to decipher the meaning behind her dreams. The royal family realized that a dark spiritual storm might be gathering on the horizon, threatening their peace. Inside the high walls of the palace, Susan warned Amadi not to let his joy blind him. Yet the young prince remained completely resolute in his path. He refused to let anxiety dictate his choices, promising they would seek divine guidance together concerning his love for Adana. Meanwhile, miles away in the dusty village of Umuofia, Adana in Wachuku was bent double over the dry earth. She was desperately trying to finish the grueling farm work her stepmother, Mama Ruth, had forced upon her, completely unaware that her name was already being spoken in royal chambers. As the Nigerian sky darkened, she dragged herself home, her feet caked in red clay and her weary body aching with exhaustion. You and I can probably sense the sudden tension building in the air as Prince Amadi arrived at the humble compound, greeting Mama Ruth with the easy grace of royalty. Though Mama Ruth welcomed him warmly, suspicion and greed flickered in her eyes as she demanded to know the reason for his sudden courtesy visit. Amadi politely asked to speak with Adana in private, a request that instantly made the older woman defensive, prompting her to demand he speak in front of everyone. Yet the prince stood his ground, insisting on a private conversation, until Mama Ruth finally relented, ushering a trembling Adana forward. When they finally stepped aside, Amadi looked down at her with gentle eyes, asking if his sudden presence had frightened her. Looking up at him shyly, Adana assured the prince that he had not scared her, though her heart was pounding wildly in her chest. Amadi gently begged her to drop his formal royal title, suggesting she simply call him by his name, but the young woman hesitated, feeling that such familiarity was far too intimate for a poor village girl. Smiling warmly, the prince told her to use whatever name felt comfortable, before confessing the real reason for his journey. He admitted that since their brief encounter on the dusty road to Enugu, his mind had found no peace. When she softly questioned why a royal would care so much about a commoner, Amadi looked directly into her eyes and confessed his deep, undeniable love for her. The stunning proposal hung heavily in the warm afternoon breeze, as Amadi looked at her with absolute sincerity, asking her to be his royal wife. Adana stared back at him in sheer disbelief, her voice cracking as she repeated the word, marriage, as if it were a foreign concept. She could not comprehend why a wealthy prince would want to bind himself to someone from her humble background. Pointing out that they barely knew each other, but Amadi was completely serious, pleading with her to believe his words, and promising that he wanted nothing more than to spend his life learning every detail about her. When she desperately asked why he would choose her out of all the women in the land, he simply replied that his heart had already made the decision. Still struggling to accept this sudden turn of events, Adana questioned why he had singled her out after all this time. Amadi explained that the moment their eyes met, a profound clarity had settled over him, convincing him that she was his destined partner. However, Adana shook her head in distress, warning him that her life was far from simple and was filled with bitter family struggles that would only bring him trouble. The prince insisted he was ready to face any hardship, but she pleaded with him to turn back before the cruelty of her world punished them both. Paralyzed by fear of what Mama Ruth would do if she accepted, she softly told him she could not give him an answer, leaving the prince deeply desperate to understand. The terrified young woman explained that making a hasty decision would only bring down the wrath of her household upon her head. Recognizing her intense anxiety, Prince Amadi reassured her that he was not demanding an immediate answer, begging her only not to let fear push him away completely. Adana admitted she was deeply conflicted, stating that she desperately needed more time to think through his incredible proposal. The prince nodded understandingly, granting her all the time she required, though he gently pleaded with her not to make him wait for too long. Before he turned to leave the quiet compound, he promised to return soon, leaving Adana with a glimmer of hope amidst her overwhelming confusion. As soon as Amadi left, Adana hesitantly confessed the prince's marriage proposal, which immediately ignited a fire of pure rage within her household. Mama Ruth scoffed in disbelief, venomously declaring that such a union would never happen under her roof, while her daughter Anita seethed with intense jealousy in the background. Anita firmly believed that she was the one truly suited for a lavish life at the palace, demanding to know what her stepsister possessed that she lacked. Driven by greed, Mama Ruth vowed to fight ruthlessly for what she believed belonged to her own daughter, commanding Adana to reject the prince the very next time he visited. Trembling under her stepmother's harsh glare, Adana had no choice but to whisper her obedience. You and I can see how bitter anger can completely blind a person, and Mama Ruth was no exception as she stormed into her friend Janet's home to vent her rage. She complained bitterly that Adana had overstepped her bounds, claiming the young girl was acting highly disrespectful now that she had the royal backing of the prince. Janet tried to calm her furious friend down quietly, advising her to sit, but Ruth refused to listen, demanding immediate action to stop the blooming romance. Sensing the dark path Ruth was heading down, Janet warned her to be extremely cautious, hinting that her intense anger would only bring ruin. But Ruth only grew more defensive, accusing her oldest friend of betraying her and taking the side of an ungrateful orphan girl. Insisting that she was only trying to prevent a disaster, Janet pleaded with Ruth to understand that her warnings came from a place of true friendship, not betrayal. She urged Ruth to deeply reflect on why Prince Amadi Anozi had set his eyes specifically on Adana, instead of trying to force a match that was never meant to be. Meanwhile, across the village, Anita was pouring her heart out to her close friend Lillian, admitting that she was utterly consumed by thoughts of the handsome young prince. Lillian quickly cautioned her about the severe danger of obsessing over a man who belonged to another, but Anita was too infatuated to care. She kept describing his striking looks, his commanding voice, and his regal, confident posture, viewing him as a completely perfect savior. With burning eyes, Anita confessed to Lillian that her obsession was not merely about the prince himself, but about the grand palace life that surrounded him. She painted a vivid picture of driving through Enugu in his luxurious cars, receiving the deep respect of the villagers, and basking in his elite status. Lillian gently tried to ground her warning that the royal world was filled with hidden traps. But Anita snapped, claiming she deserved luxury and honor just as much as anyone else. When Lillian boldly pointed out that this sounded more like bitter jealousy than a quest for justice, Anita reacted with furious indignation. Lillian softly admitted that, while she too felt a twinge of envy, she could not deny the plain truth that the prince only had eyes for Adana. Unable to accept reality, Anita desperately claimed that Prince Amadi had merely been temporarily distracted by her stepsister. Lillian refused to let her friend hide behind such obvious lies, bluntly stating that Adana had stolen absolutely nothing, because that royal life was never meant for Anita. The tense conversation was cut short the following morning when Prince Amadi arrived at the compound, offering a polite greeting to Mama Ruth, Anita, and Peter. While Mama Ruth and Anita quickly plastered on welcoming smiles, hoping to make a grand impression, the prince was only interested in one person. When he politely inquired about Adana's whereabouts, Mama Ruth coldly informed him that the young girl was not there, leaving him deeply concerned. Shrugging her shoulders with cold indifference, Mama Ruth claimed she had no idea where her stepdaughter had gone. When Amadi explained that he had come specifically to take Adana to meet his royal parents, the older woman gasped in mock surprise, instantly seizing the opportunity to ruin the girl's reputation. With a heavy, deceitful sigh, she told the prince that Adana had brought deep shame upon their family through an unforgivable act of betrayal. Anita eagerly chimed in, claiming she had personally witnessed Adana meeting secretly with another man, painting her sister as a deceptive liar. To deliver the final, crushing blow, Mama Ruth leaned in and whispered the fabricated rumor that Adana was pregnant, leaving Prince Amadi utterly shocked and speechless, spinning a web of lies. Mama Ruth claimed that a strange man had arrived early that morning and swept Adana away, though she pretended not to know his identity. She dramatically lamented how disgraced their household was, demanding to know how the prince could remain so incredibly calm in the face of such scandalous news. Seizing the moment of confusion, the bitter mother urged him to forget about Adana altogether and take Anita as his bride instead, boasting that her own daughter was a far better match who would make him proud. But Prince Amadi was not so easily manipulated, firmly stating that Anita could never replace the woman he loved. Despite their desperate pleas of only wanting to help, he saw right through their greedy trap and rejected the offer outright. Let's follow the prince as he makes his swift exit, turning to Mama Ruth with a cold, piercing gaze that instantly silenced her. He made it absolutely clear that his heart belonged only to Adana, and that he was not in the market for any woman they chose to thrust upon him. Despite Mama Ruth's desperate attempts to explain herself and keep him from leaving the compound, Amadi turned his back on them, walking out with resolute steps. A short distance down the red dirt road, he spotted Adana carrying a clay pot sent by her stepmother to buy palm oil and pepper from the local market square. Stopping her gently, he asked where she was heading before revealing the painful truth that Mama Ruth was actively plotting to ruin her reputation and could never forgive her. The color completely drained from Adana's face as the prince gently revealed the terrible rumors her stepmother was spreading through the village. He explained how Mama Ruth was telling everyone she was pregnant and had run away with a strange man, before revealing how she had tried to push Anita into his arms instead. Adana gasped in sheer horror, her hands trembling as she struggled to process the sheer malice of the family she had served so faithfully. She could barely wrap her mind around the betrayal, asking him repeatedly if he was absolutely sure of what he had heard. Overwhelmed by shame, she tearfully began to apologize for the deceit, but Amadi gently took her hands, reassuring her that she bore no responsibility for the wicked actions of others. Gazing down at her with deep affection, the prince asked why she insisted on carrying a burden that was not hers to bear. Adana wept softly, explaining that she felt immense guilt because Amadi had approached her family with a pure heart, only to be met with deceit and manipulation. But Amadi refused to let her internalize their cruelty, urging her to stop taking the blame for their wicked schemes. Before making a sudden, life-changing decision, he told her to leave her errands behind and come with him to a place where she would finally be safe and cherished. When she nervously asked where they were going, he looked her in the eyes and announced that he was taking her straight to the royal palace today, leaving her completely stunned and unprepared. As we watch this beautiful moment unfold, we can't help but feel the deep sincerity in Amadi's voice as he reassured her that his intentions had not wavered. Despite her fear of how the royal court would receive her, he promised that his family would welcome her with open arms. Adana looked down at her faded blouse, her worn skirt, and her dusty sandals, protesting that she was far too unpresentable to walk through the grand palace gates. But the prince gently took her hands, telling her that he saw the pure beauty of her soul and that she was absolutely perfect just the way she was. He declared that he would never let the shallow judgments of others dictate her true worth, promising her a life of love and protection as they took their very first steps toward a brand new destiny together. As we step into this story together, we find a young woman caught between two completely different worlds. In the dusty compound, Prince Amadi gently reminded Adana that she must not let Mama Ruth dictate her entire future. Adana, her hands full of household items, begged the prince to let her drop her things inside first, to which he willingly agreed to wait. But the moment she crossed the threshold, her family bombarded her with sharp, suspicious questions, demanding to know why she was back so quickly and if she was planning to run off again. Trembling, Adana revealed that the crown prince himself was waiting outside for her. Suddenly, the scene shifted to the grand palace, where Amadi tried to soothe her racing heart before introducing her to his royal family, presenting Adana Nonso Wachuku to his parents and sisters. Standing before royalty, Adana lowered her head and offered her deepest, most respectful greetings to King Samuel and Queen Lydia. The monarchs received her warmly, with the king welcoming her home and assuring her of her safety within the massive stone walls of the palace. Princess Susan immediately sensed the young woman's anxiety and kindly invited her to sit, gently brushing off Adana's hesitation until she finally complied. King Samuel looked upon her with a fatherly curiosity, asking about her well-being and her family background. A quiet sadness filled the room when Adana softly revealed that her parents had already passed away. Yet Susan immediately tried to comfort her, reiterating just how welcome she truly was in their home. Warm smiles filled the royal reception hall as the family expressed their joy at having Adana with them, praising her beautiful spirit. When Queen Lydia asked what she did with her time, Adana humbly admitted that her days were mostly spent doing chores, cooking and cleaning in her household. Sensing her vulnerability, Prince Amadi stepped forward to protect her, reminding his family of her difficult life. Then, with absolute certainty, he turned to his father, mother, and sisters to declare that he had made his choice. Adana was the only woman he wanted to marry. Before they departed, Princess Susan bid Adana a warm farewell, reminding her that her inner kindness was a light she should never doubt. Deeply touched by the kindness of the royal family, Adana expressed her heartfelt gratitude as they assured her she would always find a safe haven within the palace. Even the usually distant Princess Vivian wished her a safe journey home, which Adana received with quiet grace. Later, as she traveled back with Prince Amadi, Adana marveled at how remarkably gentle the powerful King Samuel had been. She admitted to the prince that the royals were entirely different from what she had imagined in her head. She specifically highlighted Princess Susan, whose warm and genuine welcome had immediately eased the terrifying pressure of stepping into a world so far beyond her own humble reality. Reflecting on Susan's warmth, Adana confessed how deeply it had touched her. But she grew hesitant when Prince Amadi asked for her thoughts on Queen Lydia. Seeing her anxiety, Amadi took her hand and assured her that his marriage proposal was genuine, remaining unchanged even outside the majestic walls of his home. Adana wanted to believe him, but fear of the future weighed heavily on her mind. Her fears materialized the moment she returned to her compound, where she was met with sharp, accusatory glares. Her foster family sneered at her, demanding to know if she now considered herself too grand for them, shouting questions about whether the prince had actually driven her to the palace. Whispers filled the dusty streets as neighbors gossiped about seeing Adana step into the prince's luxurious vehicle, headed straight for the palace. While some villagers pitied her constant suffering under Mama Ruth's roof, her bitter family members were quick to mock her, warning her that a single car ride would never change her low status in the yard. Back at the palace, a very different conversation was taking place. Princess Susan warmly championed Adana, describing her as a bright and genuinely kind person who deserved happiness. However, Princess Vivian quickly scoffed at her sister's open heart, warning her that such blind trust was incredibly naive in a world full of opportunists. Choosing to focus entirely on the positive, Susan defended her affection for Adana by pointing out how incredibly genuine and real the young woman was. Yet Vivian remained entirely unimpressed, arguing sharply that simple honesty was far from enough to qualify someone to sit beside Prince Amadi on the throne. The debate quickly grew heated, as Amadi warned that overthinking and excessive caution would make them lose this opportunity, while Vivian and Queen Lydia insisted on being prudent. When Vivian pointed out that they knew absolutely nothing about the girl's background, Amadi shot back that her character was the only thing that mattered, prompting the family to agree to observe her closely. Although the family agreed to learn more about her, they knew that a royal palace could never be governed by soft emotions alone. Vivian feared that the heavy expectations of royalty would build an invisible wall, warning that these demands could easily crush the humble girl. But Amadi remained steadfast, arguing that challenges would only serve to strengthen Adana's character if she chose to face them. While the prince expressed absolute confidence in her strength, the king's advisors harbored deep doubts about what would happen if she failed. Meanwhile, the kingdom elders gathered to congratulate King Samuel, eager to see the prince's marriage settled as a vital matter of state. Now you and I can see that while the palace celebrates, dark clouds are gathering in Adana's humble neighborhood. The royal elders praise the upcoming marriage as a highly strategic responsibility, prompting King Samuel to announce that the wedding date would be set very soon. But back in the dusty compound, toxic jealousy was boiling over, as her foster family mocked her newfound connection to royalty. They sneeringly accused her of acting proud and putting on a sad face just to gain sympathy from the prince. The tension exploded into outright hostility when Anita suddenly shrieked that her money was missing from her bag, immediately accusing Adana of being a thief. Terrified by the sudden accusation, Adana desperately protested her innocence, but Anita refused to listen, asking mockingly if the cash had simply walked away on its own. Anita screamed for Mama Ruth, claiming that Adana's head had grown so big from the prince's attention that she now felt entitled to steal. Though Adana wept and swore on her life that she had never touched the money, Mama Ruth demanded she hand it over immediately. When Peter tried to speak up in Adana's defense, his mother fiercely shut him down, commanding him to remain silent and not utter another single word. Harsh accusations continued to rain down on Adana as they insisted she had hidden the missing cash somewhere in the house. Mama Ruth, furious at Adana's continuous denials, resolved to beat some respect into the young girl, ignoring Peter's desperate pleas to stop the violence. Peter argued that his sister was innocent, but his mother banished him to his room, refusing to listen to reason. In the violent scuffle that followed, Adana was pushed violently, hitting the ground with a sickening thud. As she lay there, weeping from the sharp pain in her head, Anita sneered down at her heartlessly, claiming that she was merely putting on an act to escape punishment. Demanding that the girl end her dramatic display, Mama Ruth ordered Adana to stand completely blind to the very real agony her foster daughter was experiencing. Peter rushed forward, lifting her gently and begging her to focus her eyes on his face. Fear gripped the young boy's heart when Adana whispered that her surroundings looked warped and terrifyingly strange. Although Mama Ruth tried to brush the situation aside, telling her to simply sleep off her weakness, Adana's panic peaked as she realized she was engulfed in shadows. She cried out in terror to Mama Ruth, begging for help, as her physical sight began to rapidly fade into absolute darkness. Overwhelmed by sudden panic, Mama Ruth washed her hands of the situation, loudly declaring that she would not be held responsible for the girl's mysterious ailment. When Prince Amadi rushed to the house and found Adana disoriented, his heart shattered as he begged her to speak to him. Peter courageously spoke up, confessing that Mama Ruth and Anita had violently pushed Adana, causing her to strike her head on the hard ground. The prince immediately hurried her to the clinic, where doctors worked tirelessly to clean her wounds and monitor her vital signs, eventually delivering the grim news that her severe head trauma was incredibly critical. Because the impact had occurred directly at the back of her skull, the doctor explained that the severe trauma had struck the exact area controlling her sight. The medical team was doing everything possible, but the physician grimly noted that the long delay in bringing her to the clinic had severely damaged her chances of a full recovery. With heavy hearts, they informed Prince Amadi that the neurological damage to her optic nerves was catastrophic and likely permanent. He was told that only an absolute miracle could restore her vision now, leaving the shattered prince with no choice but to quietly ask if he could enter her room to be by her side. Directing him to room 4B, the nurse stepped aside as the devastated prince quietly entered the dim hospital room. Adana, relying entirely on her hearing now, instantly recognized the sound of his heavy footsteps before he could even speak. She reached out blindly, finding comfort as his warm hand gripped hers, but the terrifying question on her mind could no longer be ignored. When she asked him outright if she was going completely blind, Amadi tried to evade the painful reality by promising she would never face this alone. However, Adana demanded the raw, unfiltered truth, leaving the weeping prince to simply vow that he would never abandon her. Soothed by his tender promises of lifelong devotion, Adana still wondered why a royal prince would tie himself to someone so broken. Amadi simply replied that his profound love for her made leaving completely impossible. But back at the palace, a cold and calculated storm was brewing, as Queen Lydia declared that this tragic situation changed everything. The queen decreed that the upcoming royal marriage would be cancelled, ignoring her son's passionate pleas. She argued that a blind woman could never fulfill the duties of a queen, reminding Amadi that the survival of the crown required perfection and that love alone was not enough to rule a nation. This bitter clash leaves you and I wondering if love can truly triumph over the heavy demands of a crown. Queen Lydia continued to lecture her son about the burdens of royalty, warning that the shadow of Adana's disability would completely ruin his future reign. She ruthlessly claimed that Amadi's intense devotion to the girl was nothing more than deep pity disguised as romance. The prince erupted in anger, completely rejecting her cynical words and insisting his feelings were real and unshakable. Despite his mother's desperate warnings that the harsh realities of their world had changed everything, Amadi stood firm, declaring that his choice remained absolutely final.